All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast, where we're still covering the SEC transfer portal. We've got Vanderbilt built today. If you are enjoying the content, please like and subscribe. We appreciate all the support we can get. But we're going to start off with who's your favorite player that Vanderbilt got in the transfer portal this offseason? Marcus, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really love what they did overall. I guess if you go based on Torvik, they project Mike James to kind of be their top contributor. Coming over from NC State, he didn't play there last year. I forget, was he injured or what was the deal there?
I think he was injured, not completely sure.
I guess I'd probably go with him. He had a pretty good year at Louisville 2 years ago, averaged almost 13 there. Gets to the line a decent bit, but he's not an overly efficient scorer. He does have the ability to get downhill, but not a great passer either. So like I said, overall, I didn't really love what Vanderbilt did in the portal. It was either Mike James or Frankie Collins for me, but both of them are rather inefficient, not great 3-point shooters, sub 35%. I guess the one thing that Frankie Collins does have is he is a good passer, 30% assist rate last year, 26% for his career. Just not an efficient scorer. Neither of these guys really are.
Cody, let's hear your thoughts. Who do you think is the best?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they didn't wow anyone in the portal with the gets that they ended up with. I mean, there's no true star power from an offensive perspective here, but I do kind of like what they did for what Byington did for his scheme. Guys, I think there's a lot of guys here that sort of match the scheme, like Frankie Collins and Duke Miles in the backcourt, solid two-way presences, especially on the defensive end, that they can sort of guard their yard, and they can still kind of tap into winning the extras and forcing enough turnovers to be efficient in that area. But I guess for the number one guy, I would go with Frankie Collins. I think for me it's a toss-up between Collins and Duke Miles. I know Mike James, probably the most talented perimeter option I think that they got from an offensive perspective, but I actually think he may end up coming off the bench or potentially being maybe playing small forward for this team, maybe starting over Nickel. I'm not completely sure. I would assume Nickel ends up winning that job just because he was there last year and he provided some shooting, some floor spacing for this team as a connector piece. But as for Frankie Collins, I mean, he's a physical point guard who with burst he thrives in transition, which I think is a pretty perfect fit on the offensive end for a Mark Byington offense. I mean, it's a small sample size with TCU, but I thought that was a pretty good fit for him as well. So we've kind of seen him in a similar system. They like to get up and down. Jamie Dixon likes having physical guards there as well. So I think Collins fit the mold there. He was a 70th percentile transition scorer last year, and he's very rim based, which a Byington offense is going to sort of cut out the mid-range, be more rim and three. And I think Frankie Collins is at least going to provide some efficiency around the rim. He was 88th percentile in rim field goal attempts last season, 96th percentile in the year before at Arizona State. He was 55th percentile in efficiency. And like I said, there's just downhill bursts and a real ability to, elevate at the rim. And he also, 35.6% free throw attempt rate is pretty solid for a guard. But yeah, I like him from a two-way perspective. I actually think he could end up being one of the better guard defenders in this league, just his physicality. He can guard almost any type of perimeter option. He's super disruptive. He's a 3.5% career steal rate. He's done this at 3 different schools. So it kind of proves that, he can kind of show up at any school, no matter the scheme and really have success. So I think his two-way presence, his floor raising ability is going to be solid for this team.
Marcus, how do you feel that these players fit into the Vanderbilt system as a whole?
I mean, I think Cody kind of touched on it, and they made a lot of moves in the portal, right? I know, last time, or off camera, we were talking about it. But they brought in 8 guys. 7 or 8 guys anyway. And like they did bring in like some shooting to kind of complement these guards that aren't as efficient. But like Cody said, they should help on the defensive end, James and Collins, that is. But you have like Tyler Harris, who came in from Washington, who's got some versatility. I think Jalen Washington, like coming over from North Carolina, had a really bad year last year in terms of like based on expectations. If you actually like look at the numbers though, like eye test kind of told the story of it wasn't very pretty for him. He was pretty effective on the boards though, like 10% offensive rebound rate. I think he was near like 19, 20% on the defensive glass. Finished solid at the rim, 72% there. Like I do think that like Jalen Washington could be in for like a much improved season with, I guess, like less pressure, lower expectations being at Vanderbilt versus like a school like North Carolina where it's like Final Four or bust every year. So I do think like he may be a bit more comfortable this year, and we may see kind of a mini breakout out of Jalen Washington. But then like there's some other guys they brought in that like I'm not really sure about. Like I don't know, AK Okereke coming from Cornell. Like he tried to use a lot of back down stuff on his offensive game. And then like George Kimball III, coming from Eastern Kentucky, he's ASUN players just don't typically translate that well when they transfer up. We've kind of seen that, like most notably last year, Jalen Blackman going from Stetson to Miami, and like he wasn't very good. So we'll see with some of these other guys. I think there are some unknowns.
Cody, you already kind of touched on, if they fit into the system, but what are the other transfers that stand out to you? And talk a little bit about the other transfers.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty high on Jalen Washington going into last season. So it was a little bit upsetting to see him, like, he really struggled, when trying to stay on the floor for, more than 5 or 6 minutes at a time, because he really struggled with foul trouble. I mean, last season, 5.7 fouls per 40 minutes. The year before, he was 6.6 per 40 minutes. I mean, it wasn't a very high volume of minutes for him as a sophomore, I believe. But it's a real issue when it comes to him being able to stay on the floor, and there's not really a ton of protection behind him. Like you have a guy like Mason Nicholson coming in from Jacksonville State, who is a much different type of big. He's more offensive centric, gets on the offensive glass. He'll provide value at the rim, but as like a true defensive anchor, I don't really see it from Nicholson to be able to, really fill in those spot minutes all that well in a Byington scheme. But so I actually think Jalen Washington has more responsibility than he had at North Carolina. Obviously Carolina had Van Allen Lubin at their disposal, who I think he had a much better season than a lot of people thought he did. And obviously Washington struggled. And I think he only played 37% of Carolina's minutes last year. I expect him to play 50%, maybe even more than that, just with the rest of the projected rotation from a front court perspective. I mean, I know they could play small potentially with McLaughlin at the 5, but I'm not sure Byington wants to do that because he values getting on the defensive glass. So that would kind of take away from that. But as for some other guys, I think Okereke can sort of fit the system from a defensive perspective. On the offensive side, he ran the show for Cornell. He was more of a point forward, but I think with a lesser role, probably coming off the bench right away. I think his perimeter versatility, along with he's a really big forward. He's 6'7", 245, 250 pounds. I think he's able to guard in space a little bit better than it seems that he can. So I think he fits the scheme if his offensive workload isn't too big. Then there's obviously guys like Harris and Mike James, like Marcus mentioned, that I think are more of the swing pieces for this offense, because there's not a ton of catch and shoot ability throughout this roster besides Tyler Nickel. Duke Miles, shot at 43% last year, but isn't all that comfortable in the catch and shoot game with a high volume. So I think guys like Harris and James are going to be real swing pieces for this team. And I think Mike James is the more talented shooter, although, 2 years ago he shot it 34% from three, and Harris shot it almost 50% last year. But just from the tape that I dove into, Mike James looks a little bit more comfortable on the move and off the catch, just quicker release overall. So I think he's going to play more of a role on the offensive side. So yeah, and like I mentioned, like I think Byington did a good job of matching his scheme. It's just the talent overall on the offensive side, and maybe a little bit on the defensive side, like rim protection wise, because we're a little bit concerned about Washington overall. I just think it's hard for me to say that they are going to be better than they were last year in Byington's like sort of breakout season.
Yeah, Marcus, that kind of flows right into my next question. What's the expectations for this Vanderbilt team? What's the ceiling and a floor for them, and maybe a very early prediction on their season?
Yeah, I don't really think they got better either. I think especially in like the guard creation department, like, on the offensive end, I don't know. They don't have like Jason Edwards or Hogard back to kind of get the offense going. Edwards could get a bucket. He averaged like almost 18 last year there. They're going to miss that, I think. And like, I really like Mark Byington, but I just don't think this team is really up to par of what last year's team was. I think that like they're kind of a bubble-ish team to me. I know like places like Torvik are kind of higher on them. I think they're kind of like a middle of the pack SEC team on the upper end, like maybe a few spots lower. I think like it's pretty narrow on where they can be. I think like bubble or, just out of the tournament.
Marcus, Cody, sorry. Let's hear it from you.
I expect them to be fairly similar to what they were last year, and it's just like the upside for the squad doesn't seem to be as high as kind of what I was getting at. But I really do like Frankie Collins and Duke Miles in the backcourt. I think Duke Miles is a little bit of a better creator than he showed last year at Oklahoma. There just wasn't much of a role for him to play on the ball a ton. But when he was at High Point, he had provided a ton of efficiency all over the floor. And he's a particularly like pretty great rim scorer for his size. So I do think he can handle a little bit more responsibility. But overall, like I mentioned, I just think the offensive talent is sort of a question at this point in time. I actually do think they become a better defensive team just because I do like Frankie Collins as like the head of taking away the opposing offense is like head of the snake. And obviously Washington is a pure rim protector. I think he's going to be fine in that area. It's just a matter of him staying on the floor. And Byington teams always have depth, and this team is really no different. So I do expect them to improve on the defensive side, with the offensive side being in question at this point in time. So I'll say I would agree, like it's bubble-ish, but I don't think the floor is like bottom of the SEC by any means. I think they sit middle of the pack right now.
All right, we're going to wrap things up here for Vanderbilt. But as always, thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.